So welcome to everyone who is watching live. This session will also be recorded and sent out to everyone who has been unable to join live with us. And so without further ado, I'd like to warmly greet everyone to today's session. We are going to be talking about the Wildbiome Project, which is something which Monica Wilde has spearheaded project for almost 2 years now that she's been working on in the background. It started off as a bit of a personal experimentation, I guess, and it's developed into something really quite magnificent. And so we're really looking forward to learning more about how she got into the project, how it started, and then also how it's developing and how it is going to finally arrive in a feature film called Our Wildbiome, which is now released. Isn't that right, Monica?
Yes, that's right. Carlos, who filmed and directed it, recorded the journey of some of the 2023 participants, and that's just been released, which is really great.
Fantastic. And so just to tell us a bit about yourself, Monica. Obviously, you are a research herbalist and forager. You've written a book called The Wilderness Cure as well, and I think people would be really interested just to hear a bit of background about how you kind of fell into this world and why it's of interest to you.
Gosh. Well, I mean, I've always been absolutely fascinated by plants. You know, I had a really close relationship with them when I was little, when I was growing up. I actually grew up in East Africa, in Kenya, which is where my grandparents had come from. And, but, you know, I never knew you could be a herbalist until I met Dee in 1995 when I'd moved to Scotland. And so that began my journey with Napiers. So it's been, gosh, 95, I mean, that's 30 years now.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's kind of crazy how time flies, I suppose.
Yeah, and I've done lots of different things. And then finally I was able to study and got my master's degree when I was 50. But one of the things that I started doing about 20 odd years ago was teaching foraging. And it had really come out of, it was really one of those chance things. A friend of mine, Joanna, was doing some work with the Forestry Commission with the Nepali community to try to reach other communities who had not been born and brought up here, who didn't know that we had the right to roam in Scotland, that we had this wonderful access. And she was doing something with the children and they wanted something for the grown-ups to do. And she said to me, Mo, you know about plants. And of course, in those days, I was bringing up 3 kids on my own and needed to earn money. So I said, yes, what would they like to do? And that was my first foray into foraging. But along the way, you know, as it grew, I suppose it was just luck that at the time social media was taking off so I could reach people and lots of people came on my walks. So over the years, I must have taught, you know, thousands of people. And one thing that they would always say when you told them things like, oh, you know, those little bobbly bits on cleavers, which we call sticky willy up here. Yeah. You know, they're related to coffee. And if you toast them and grind them, you can make a drink that tastes very like coffee and gives you a very little buzz. And people would go like, oh, but come on, you know, when are you going to do that? You know, go and pick all these little things and do that. I mean, you know, could you really live on wild food anymore? You know, like for a year or something. So there was always this question, could you live on wild food? And could you do it for a year? And then, of course, when it got to lockdown, a lot of my teaching work dried up overnight. You know, we weren't allowed out and I couldn't teach at the botanics anymore. And you know, my children have left home, so I don't have to pretend everything's chicken and none of it's got seaweed in. So, yeah, so I thought, well, you know, if I'm going to do it, now's the time to see if I could live on wild food for a year. So that's really how it all led to that.
Amazing. And so it was during lockdown that you had the spark, I guess, for this idea, and you decided to make yourself a guinea pig. Did you do it alongside anyone, or did you think just you wanted to see how you went all on your own first and then kind of progress from there?
Well, initially it was just myself, and then my friend Matthew Rooney, he decided that he'd like to do it as well. So we both did it, for the year. And gosh, it feels like a long time ago now. But because I've got this sort of blend of nature interest, but also science, and my dad was a lawyer, so you always had to have a good argument for everything and solid evidence. And so what I did was I bought some gut microbiome tests and tested my gut all the way through, and just changing it every time the food changed, which was really through the 5 seasons of the year, because in the wild food calendar there are actually 5 seasons if you think about the food seasons of the plants.
Cool.
And Matthew, so I got 7 tests in total, I think, and Matthew had 6 because his first one got lost. Unfortunately, at the time we also had Brexit, which had also motivated me, for that time, because we were hearing about, lorries queuing up at Dover and worrying about whether or not we'd still be able to get food in and, things like that. And, I think having grown up, when I was learning to cook as a teenager in Malawi, there was loads and loads of shortages in the shops because there was a war in Mozambique and everything, was coming in by rail. So I'd grown up with this idea that food security wasn't necessarily something you took for granted. So we did all these tests. One of them got lost in the post because of Brexit. But other than that, we had these complete tests. And at the end of it, we could see that something really interesting was happening with our gut microbiome. It was, the way that they moved around in different bacteria. So that was really the start.
Brilliant. And in terms of you getting those results back and having that kind of feedback loop, what was the hardest or strangest part of that experience? Obviously, you are a very experienced forager yourself, but actually incorporating it into a fully foraged diet must have been some challenges and some things which you weren't quite expecting, I suppose.
Yes, I mean the challenges weren't the ones you'd expect. People said, oh, you're going to miss like coffee and chocolate and but I didn't miss any of those things. It's funny, once your body switches into wild, you lose those cravings for other things. But I started to miss things like color in my food. At the end of going into the spring, I was just so glad when flowers came out and I could put flowers in my salad, because everything was sort of like dark brown and dark green. And there was just this sort of monotony. And I know it sounds a silly thing. And it was like in, at the beginning of June when the first wild strawberries. And at this point, I hadn't had fruit for several months because the last of the wild apples, which are pretty hard and tart at the best of times, and then to see those little red jewels and the taste of them was amazing.
Brilliant. I think we kind of lose the excitement of seasonality in our food because everything is just so available off the shelves, and people kind of often forget that things only grow in certain conditions. But we've kind of, as humans, evolved to farm things at periods where they're not meant to be. So having a strawberry in the middle of winter is, it's a nice luxury, but actually our ancestors would have very much had, as you say, 5 seasons. And I'd be quite interested to go back to that point that you made, because I'm not familiar with what that kind of 5th season is or what they're divided up into.
Yeah, and in different countries, I met some Aborigines from Australia at a food fair. And one of them said to me, yeah, we have 11 seasons. The other one said, well, we have 12 seasons where we are. And somebody else said, well, we have 3 seasons, fire, earth, and water. But, the people who said, oh, we have 12 seasons. I said, well, what do you mean 12 months? He said, no, 12 seasons, because we have to move every month. We count a season as when you have to move and relocate for food. And, here you can be inland in the winter. But, by the end of January, beginning of February, you have to move down to the coast because there's no food left on the land anymore. But that's when the seaweeds and the mussels and the oysters and things are coming into their own. And then, around April, you're starting to get the land veg. And so that you're moving back in. And then in the summer, you've got to go either down to the coast again, and eat fish or go up the mountains after, where the grasses are greener, because at land level it's all dry and, inedible.
Mhm. Interesting. Okay, brilliant. We have got a question from Sheila, who did ask about what are the 5 seasons, but also ask what microbiome tests would you recommend?
Oh, I'm not very up on the microbiome tests at the moment because ours are going directly to a laboratory. So currently what I've done is to buy Zymo, they're like test tubes with a lid on, with a fluid in them, and they can store stool samples for up to 2 years at room temperature or indefinitely when frozen. And to do it for the 100 people that we've just done, which has been 250 stool samples, to have done that with a commercial laboratory would have cost us about £70,000.
Wow.
So, and this is all self-funded and crowd-funded. So I'm not really up on all the different labs at the moment. Do you have anyone that you know of, Arjun?
No, we tend to work similarly to the way you kind of done it, and just work with private labs if ever we need to. But you're right, the cost of the test is exceptionally high if you want a quality sample. So yeah, I think Sheila, for a sort of layman usage, I think there's probably not one that's going to be easy to find on the market, or at least that we would know of. But hopefully Google is your friend in that situation. Follow-up question from Sheila is, when you're eating wild, can you warm the food with fire? So I guess that kind of touches on the point more about the nutritious element of raw foods and how that is affected within a only forage diet.
Yes, well, we hadn't abandoned all modern technology because it wasn't really an experiment in could you survive like Bear Grylls, but it was more what is the impact of going back to an ancestral diet. So we did, have a fridge, and we did have a dehydrator, and that marvelous invention, the jam jar. Where would I, I don't know if I'd have survived the Stone Age without containers.
Yeah.
So yes, we did cook.
Fantastic. And just going back to that point, comparing and contrasting kind of how you did it and how our ancestors would have lived off the land, there obviously would have been many more challenges and risks for our ancestors. But what would you say their kind of main patterns of foraging would have been? Were they quite nomadic, or would they have sort of stuck to certain areas, as you say, around the coast, for example?
Well, we know that they was what we'd call semi-nomadic. So people would have had areas, people would have known the, the plants and the locality of areas up to about 200 square hectares. But within that, they would have had key camps. So you'd have had like a winter camp, you'd have had a summer camp. So for instance, for a lot of the year, I would locate myself in an ideal world within a day's walk of an estuary, near a river that was also within a day's walk of a forest, so that I'd always had some fresh water, but I could get to these different habitats. And, with foraging, what tends to happen is people have these camps, and then they do what's called daisy chaining out of it, like petals. They go on these forays around it. And then when a season makes a big change, you move that big camp.
Excellent.
And again, daisy chain out of it.
Brilliant. We have got another comment and question from Rachel. I'm in awe of the achievement of living off wild food for so long. My foraging skills aren't in the same league. I get the impression you needed meats and fish. Would you consider it impossible to eat exclusively wild food if vegan?
You wouldn't be able to without a lot of modern technology. In the 2025 cohort, we did actually have somebody who did decide to try it as a vegan. And she just did 1 month, and she managed to do it quite healthily. She did need to use a lot of fruit that had been frozen from the year before, and nuts that had been stored from the year before. So to survive as a vegan, you would have to basically, in about a 2-month period in the autumn, collect all the food that you needed for a year ahead. Because otherwise, and what she found, it wasn't the proteins that were the challenge, it was getting enough fats.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I guess particularly oily fish would be the key one that our ancestors would have had in the old days along the coastline, and then regular animals as well.
And
So
insects, of course, things like wasp larvae, which I tried. And
yeah, how was that to kind of go a bit more into the weird and wonderful, shall we say?
well, they taste of lemons.
Oh, excellent. I'll
They're
put that
sort
on
of
the menu
like
for this
like
weekend.
squidgy lemon drops.
Yeah. And Monica, I know on your website that you've got, and obviously you've written a lot of books around, or you've read a lot of books as well around foraging. Are there specific books that you'd recommend for people who are looking to kind of delve into this sort of the beginning stage?
Gosh, well, there are a lot of books out there, and I would just say make sure you're not buying one that's been written by AI, because I've personally tested ChatGPT on its foraging knowledge, and it's not great yet. And unfortunately, there's a lot of self-published books that look deceptively like books now about subjects that are considered. So always look at who the author is. We've got the Association of Foragers in the UK, and a lot of people there have written a lot of very, very good books. I've got about 2 shelves of them. And so, check who the author is. And if you think that the author is somebody who's qualified to tell you, then, go ahead and do that. I mean, I could shamelessly plug my own. I have written a book that came out this year called Free Food, Wild Plants and How to Eat Them, which covers plants and seaweeds. And that's very much aimed at, starting people off who have come to this for the first time.
Excellent. Brilliant. So we've got like quite a nice background on foraging, I think. So why don't we go back to the start a bit more and explain what you're hoping to achieve with the Wildbiome Project, and what you would class as foraging more traditionally, and how that impacted the project.
Well, at the end of the year, we're armed with these 2 sets of gut tests. I realized that, some of it I could tell what was going on, so Oxalobacter formigenes, it's a bacteria in your gut that breaks down oxalates. And mine had, going from winter to spring, mine increased by 1,100%. So it was obviously breaking down all the oxalates from dock and, sorrel and all of those other things I was eating. But some of the things I wasn't really sure what was happening at all, especially when there were differences between the 2 of us. And I went out looking to get a professional opinion, or offering to pay for a professional opinion to have a look at this, and wasn't getting a great response from the sort of scientific community. And of course, I then realized that, we could have just been 2 very weird people. And, what people were looking for, what people would really take notice of, would be if a group of people did it under, with controlled start and end point data. So there was a need for almost like, it's not really a clinical trial, but there was definitely a need for us to do something sort of more formal. And as good fortune would have it, we managed to get some sponsorship. Dan Saladino, who runs the food program, had been taking a lot of interest in, what I was proposing to do. And he introduced me to Tim Spector, who agreed that Zoe would sponsor a small cohort. So in 2023, we started off with 24 people, 12 of them willing to eat wild food only for 1 month, and 12 eating wild food for 3 months. And we did blood tests at the beginning and at the end, and we took stool samples at the beginning and the end, and we put people on, blood sugar monitors and weighed them and approached it far more scientifically. And that's the one that Carlos followed. He followed some of the participants, not all of them, because they're spread all around the country, and Ireland. But he followed some of them on their journey and, got their thoughts about it. And that is what the film Our Wildbiome records, this journey in 2023, these 24 people.
Fantastic. And these 24 people, were they just regular folk like myself, or were they themselves quite
Yes.
versed in foraging.
No, no, at that stage, I hadn't organized anything like this before. It's quite a scary commitment. And so basically, I went to my colleagues at the Association of Foragers. So these were people teaching foraging. Now, that didn't mean that they'd lived on it on their own before. I mean, they all, had big challenges.
Some level of, sure.
And I mean, if you look at most of the foraging cookbooks that are out there, people are still using, sugar and flour and eggs and, you're mixing wild foods with other things. But to go 100% wild, was a real challenge. This year, we had 100 people start. Some people did drop out along the way. But this year, we had a real blend of people. So people like you as well. And next year, it'll also be open to everyone.
Excellent. Well, yeah, I might give it a go. It does sound like something that you would have to, as you say, be very structured with and plan ahead. And did you guys offer support in terms of recipes and how to find the foraged goods, or did you kind of leave it up to individuals to learn a little bit themselves as well?
Well, we don't supply the food. But what I did, no, it was really important to me that everyone was supported. So I used a community networking software to create a community forum that everybody became a member of. And that's where I put all of the core information. And that's where people could share recipes, and that is where people could go to for help. So we monitored it all the time. And I would have regular Zoom drop-in meetings. So that anybody could drop in, like a surgery evening where people could drop in and say, oh, I'm struggling, or no, things are going well, or just hang out. And this time, I mean, during the 2023 cohort, people were keeping diet diaries, but they kept them in all sorts of different forms. Some filled them in on a spreadsheet, some of them wrote them in a diary, some of them just gave me a printout of their Instagram posts, some of them wrote it on the back of a beer mat, So this time we actually put all of the wild food data, because I've been collecting data about the nutritional values of wild food for 20 years now. And I put all of that data into an app called the Eat Wild app with all of my recipes as well. And that's what we use to support people and then to monitor what they were eating every day. And that information has just been downloaded yesterday.
Oh, it's very exciting. And are the results as you expected, or the data as you expected?
Well, it's too early to know how it relates with the food diaries. Okay. Macy's starting work on that on the this month, now that the data's out. And that will tell us what what people ate in terms of calories and macro and micronutrients. But it will also answer questions like, for instance, people say, well, if everybody went foraging, there wouldn't be anything left in the countryside, or, they would strip everything bare. And I sometimes very tritely respond to that. Well, I can't see there'd be a shortage of nettles, but we might, as communities, we might actually have to share the chicken of the woods fungus and so on. But we don't actually know what people would eat in times of if people had to fall back totally on the land and the wild. But when we've got this data process now, we'll be able to say, yeah, X amount of foragers ate X tons of nettle and X tons of dandelion, and they also ate this rare and endangered species. I don't think for 1 minute they did, but we'll actually have data to back that up, which I think is really interesting.
Brilliant. And then, yeah, I guess we can use that data to then extrapolate and see, across the country in different regions, what that would actually look like, which is, as you say, very interesting. And one thing that's just cropped up in my mind is what the balance between growing stuff yourself and also it being foraged. How do you weigh that up, or how do you view that? If someone wanted to try a forage-only diet, but wanted to start by maybe growing some herbs and growing some plants in their garden, is that classed as foraging at all if it's in your own space, or is that farming?
Oh, if we had to draw the line at, if you're growing cabbages and, rosemary and cabbages and other things like that, no, you can't eat them. I had to let my vegetable garden go fallow for a year. But
That's
if
very
you've
sad.
got a garden full of dandelions and chickweed, yes, of course you can eat that as well.
Brilliant. And one of the key things that you've been speaking about is the changes to your gut microbiome, and a lot of the participants, their gut microbiomes saw significant, we would call them improvements in terms of the diversity. Why is that important, and why do you think that change kind of came about?
Well, it's important because our gut microbiome governs so much. I mean, old Duncan Napier used to say back in the Victorian times, the seat of your health is your gut. And that is still true today. That is absolutely so true today. I mean, you know, the amount of old Napier's formulas that were for the gut, because everybody realized that, you know, if your gut wasn't good, everything else went to well, we didn't know then that it was the microbiome, but it's that gut microbiome and the way that it interacts with the immune system, it interacts with the brain. There are really more bacteria in our bodies than there are human cells. And so it's really important that it's the right balance and the right diversity. And unfortunately, a lot of things in modern life have actually changed microbiomes and caused dysbiosis. And that then leads to all sorts of other problems as well that we see in the clinics. But one of the things that, you know, so it had been sort of, people had become aware of the fact that, well, we need to have diversity in the gut. And we also, but people were also saying things like, oh, you know, some of the bacteria seem to be disappearing and we don't have the same bacteria as the Hadza. Now, I was brought up in East Africa, and I'm not surprised we don't have the same microbiome as the Hadza because we don't eat the same sorts of foods. And even going back to eating wild food in Scotland, it is not the same type of diet. So of course our microbiome is going to be different. What was more interesting to me is, well, what were our ancestors eating? You know, what was our ancestral microbiome? What is a, you know, Scottish or British indigenous microbiome? We just don't know. Nobody's ever really looked at what ours was all that time ago. We didn't even really know what people were eating. You know, you get a certain amount of things preserved in archaeological digs, but it tends to be bones and grains. And, you know, if somebody had gone out to a wild strawberry patch and eaten all the wild strawberries straight off the hill, that wasn't going to appear in the archaeological remains. And then there are people, forensic archaeologists, who do incredible work looking at isotopes that turn up in bones and teeth and things like that. And from that, they could get a steer as to what people might have been eating. But nobody back then kept a diet diary, so they just didn't know. Now we're actually, with the Wildbiome Project, we've actually linked up with the School of Forensic Archaeology at the University of Bradford, two really incredible professors there, Dr. Hannah Kuhn and Dr. Julia Beaumont. So they're now analysing, they've been analysing the hair. They did a pilot study on the hair from the people in the 2023 project. And that was just presented in Turin last week. And what they're finding is that when you go from a normal supermarket diet to eating a forage diet, the isotopes in your hair change significantly. Isn't that cool?
Brilliant. Absolutely amazing. And so a forage diet can really impact quite quickly in terms of changes to your health. And obviously you mentioned participants either did 1 month or 3 months. At what point did the changes start to become apparent for things such as weight loss or weight improvement, weight management, blood pressure, blood sugars, the gut microbiome changes? Is that quite instant, or does it take longer than say those first 1 month participants took?
It's so interesting. It's very quick. It is very quick. I think particularly when you're wearing a blood sugar, blood glucose monitor, we have graphs that show that what I did was make people this time wear them for, because they last 2 weeks, wear them for a week before and then the week that they start. So the week before, you'd see people's blood sugar moving around, going up and down with meals and things like that. And then literally from the first day of eating wild food, you see that flatten out.
Wow.
And so what we were seeing was, people with diabetes seeing their blood sugar come down. And we were seeing weight loss for people who had really been struggling with their weight before. I mean, there is, statistically, it's actually better than these injections.
Brilliant.
So,
yeah,
and blood
I
pressure.
suppose...
Blood pressure was another important one. People with high blood pressure, you saw all of the blood pressure come down and normalize.
It's amazing. And were the results similar across the board in terms of things normalizing to, we can call it a standard level, but a kind of functional health level, or were certain types of people more predisposed to bigger changes or improvements?
Yeah, well, that, I mean, obviously, if people are very overweight, they're going to lose it quicker. But in general, what we found that people who didn't have a lot of weight to lose lost a little bit over the first sort of 3 weeks. And then by week 4, they'd started to stabilize. And, when we did the year, Matthew lost 6 kilos at one point during the year, but by the end of the year had put it on. I mean, I think he was only about 1 kilo different, wow. Whereas I'd lost 31. But then, I have lipedema, so I really had struggled with my weight before. I mean, by COVID, I was at my sort of, just past the menopausal, heaviest. But for me, the Wildbiome diet, is not just a diet as in a type of food that we eat, but is also a way of keeping me healthy too. I've got a whole theory about lipedema and ancestral genes and things, but I won't go into that now.
Excellent. And just moving on to the film then, which is now released, and it's been a big project for yourself and also for Carlos, who you mentioned. At what point did you realize this is a story that needed to be told, and why did you want it to be told by film?
Oh, right from the beginning, because I mean, I'm doing this because I believe this work is really, really important, for many different reasons. And it hasn't really been studied before. And, I can collect statistics and blood test results and write up, papers. The results from 2023 have actually been peer reviewed and accepted for publication in a Spring and Nature journal. So they will be coming out. But that doesn't encapsulate the full range of what happened, how it was to be on the project, how you felt, how your emotions change, the lightness of being, and the change in your spirit, which you can't really capture in a dry academic paper, and what it meant to go out, what it meant for some people to eat wild meat, when they'd been vegetarian for many years. All of these personal stories was what we really wanted to get across.
Excellent. Yeah, and I suppose part of the draw or the allure of film is you can visually see that emotion. You, as much as you can read and imagine something, actually visually seeing it and watching people going out about the land and finding these lovely herbs and plants that grow just everywhere, and sometimes not everywhere. Sometimes they're very rare things that you might be finding, or things which you may never have tasted before, which I think is very exciting as well. And so for someone who's sitting down to watch our Wildbiome, what do you hope they feel or they take away from it at the end of the film?
Gosh, what do I hope? I just hope that it really opens people's eyes and makes them think about what they eat and how they live. And it's so interesting because this was quite a different bunch of people. We even had somebody there who, she's in the film, who was weaning her baby onto wild foods. Wow. At the time. And I think it's what's nice about it is that instead of you being sort of dictated to or spoken at, it gives you a chance to make that journey with people. I mean, a lot of people will recognize some of the plants that they have and think, well, you know, I could give that a go. And, you know, I think everybody should add at least, you know, one wild food into their meal every day. You know, we're trying to reach 30 species a week. I ate over 300 species of plants and 87 species of fungi when I did the year.
That's mind-boggling numbers. I'm not sure how you, how you can even begin to imagine or start to track that. So you propose to people to try and add one per day. Is that what you'd say, or one per meal, or what's a good start?
Why not? Or even just start maybe just at the weekend. Add one extra wild vegetable on a Saturday and one on a Sunday or something.
Brilliant. And it's a really nice activity as well. I think must admit I've only been foraging a couple of times, and it was for wild garlic just because I'm not brave enough to venture anywhere else. But it did make a lovely pesto, and actually just being out there and being under the canopy of trees and finding them and actually touching them and smelling them, it is amazing, and it does connect you to the food that you're then eating later. So most of us probably are unlikely to start straight away into a full wild forage diet. What practical lessons can we take away into our own kitchen? So what sorts of recipes are there that you might suggest for a beginner?
Well, I mean, up until the Second World War, dandelion leaves were in every single cookbook. They are to the, you know, the West, the British diet what rocket was to the Mediterranean diet, and we're importing, you know, rocket or having it grown for us now. But dandelion leaves, you know, you can either have them in a salad and keep them a little bitter, because bitterness actually gets the saliva going and the bile going and sort of gets the whole digestive tract going, as you'll know with some of the Napiers bitters.
Yeah, I was going to say
very bitter.
Dandelion is absolutely in a lot of our blends, and particularly some of the ones for encouraging appetite, as you say.
Yeah, and then people used to put flower pots upside down over them in the spring to blanch the leaves to make them less bitter. But you can also steam them and cook them. You know, dandelion greens, they would just be steamed and then squeezed, because once the water's out of them, the cooking water's out of them, the bitterness goes right down. And then you can serve them up with a little bit of butter or creme fraiche. And the same with nettles. You know, you can do anything with a nettle that you can do with spinach, except eat it raw, unless you're in Devon and you're entering that, or Dorset and joining that nettle eating competition.
Yeah,
you can have it with some creme fraiche and nutmeg and black pepper, or you can roll it up into pasta, and you can do so many things with them.
Excellent. And for people who might be a little bit afraid of delving into or rewilding their plates at home, what advice would you give them? Is it as risky or as scary as it is purported to be, or do you think there is enough kind of knowledge in books and people and expert foragers they should partner with who can help and guide them, or do you think they should maybe start tentatively? What's the best way?
Do you know, we wouldn't have survived the last 300,000 years as Homo sapiens if it was that scary.
Very true.
Really. And, you know, people are really good at noticing small detail. I mean, take a teenage boy into a sports shop where they've got 300 pairs of white trainers and ask him to point out the most expensive pair, and he'll do it like that. You know, because there'll be something in the stitching or the little flash at the back. You know, we're really good at detail, and it's just a question of getting your confidence. And everybody already knows a few things. And it's a question then of just gradually adding to that knowledge. You know, don't try and overwhelm yourself with learning everything at once, but learn a few things for each season. If you learn one new thing a week, if you took a plant on a Sunday and decided you'd study that for the week, by the end of 2 years, that's 100 plants you know.
Excellent. Yeah, I suppose that's a fantastic way of breaking it down, isn't it? And into more manageable chunks of knowledge, and especially for people who are very busy, that could be a very nice way of doing it. It's just, you know, one plant a week or one fungi a week. Brilliant. And in terms of what's next, you've obviously gone from one person, just yourself, to 2 people, to 24 people, to 100? And so what's next for the Wildbiome Project?
Well, the next is handing the reins over to the team at the University of Bradford. I'll still be working, with them and helping to project manage it and to look after everybody. But they will be, they've applied for a UK research government grant, and they'll be able to deliver so much more. So they've got a team which is from the forensic archaeology department, and then also people looking at metabolic health, people looking at the gut microbiome and the skin microbiome. So it's interdisciplinary, and we're making all of the data open source and open access. So I'm also really interested that if there are other people out there who have a particular interest in, say, for instance, hormonal health, because we have seen, when we look at the personal stories, some of which are relayed through the film, where we weren't actually measuring them, but people come back anecdotally and say, well, I actually was an insomniac all my life, but I slept like a baby the whole of the time I was eating only wild food. I mean, we had one chap who has had hay fever, hideous hay fever, since he was a child. And he's tried everything, including nettles and all the other things we would normally recommend. Mm-hmm. And he did the Wildbiome for 3 months and didn't have hay fever. This is the first time in 50 years he's not had hay fever. So if there are people who are interested in like hormonal health or respiratory health or, other aspects, we're building up this really interesting set of data. By the time we've done the 2026 one, we'll have had over 200 people, 220 people, in our database of results from eating wild foods, and as we grow this, you can then start to go back and interrogate that data and, learn so much about the things that we've lost, the things that we've dropped. And maybe that will inform things like diversified farming. If we want to have better countryside and set aside spaces, maybe we can also, encourage the wild plants that also provide nutrition and food resilience. There's so many ways that you can do things with this data once you've got it.
It is very exciting, I must say, and I think a good way for people to better understand how it might impact them is to go and watch the film, and that way they can see real life stories of how it's benefited people, how their lives have changed, how difficult it is as well, because I'm sure there's a lot of emotion that's visible during the film. Brilliant. And so I guess my final question directly to you, Monica, before we go on to a Q&A section is, how can people who are watching support you, support the project, and potentially get involved in the future?
Well, support at the moment, money's helpful. Mm-hmm. So the proceeds of the film will be going back into the Wildbiome Project to help us fund it. As I said, so far it's been nearly all privately funded and citizen, funding appeals and things like that. It's the same with the Eat Wild app. All of the joining fees for that again go back into the project. And if they want to take part next year, they just have to drop me an email. It's wildbiome@circadio.co.uk, but I'll put it in the chat. And just put Wildbiome 2026 in the heading. And then around December, I will be emailing everybody who's shown interest and saying, this is what's happening, this is what it's going to take, this is what your commitment would need to be, because we're looking at it being in autumn 2026. Amazing,
absolutely amazing. Great, so I think we'll move on to a couple of questions that we've had in the chat, and then also to some pre-submitted questions as well. So Sue says, just ordered it. I think that was in reference to one of your books, Monica. So Sue's potentially ordered your book there.
Oh, thank you.
Debbie said, do you avoid urban areas or try to go into countryside? Do you try to avoid areas where there could be pollution? So if you're from a very urban area or a big city, how challenging would it be to move to a forage diet?
Yeah, well, as you'll see when you watch the film, some of the people were in cities. Gemma, who's in the film, was right in the middle of London there, and you have to be very careful not to to take things from obviously polluted areas. Right in the middle of a roundabout, it's not a great place. But even in cities, there are large parks and there are heaths and there are very often graveyards that have been allowed to go wild. There are canals and riverbanks. So there are always a lot more wild spaces than you'd think. I live between Edinburgh and Glasgow, so it's sort of rural, but it's what you'd call degraded rural. There were a lot of strip mines and it's quite a bleak area. There's a lot of new housing and building going on. It's a real sort of bit of commuter belt there. But I was amazed that 90% of what I needed came from within 5 miles of where I live. And you get to know little pockets of places. And then, the other part of it, I'd have to make, one trip to the seaside once every 6 months to pick enough seaweed, and in the mushroom season, a trip up to Perthshire to get some good, really good mushrooms.
And I suppose that's quite a nice added bonus, is you're traveling to new places, to different places, you're out in the woods, you're doing coastal walks. So there's the element of being active, being outdoors, as part of the overall well-being piece as well.
Yeah, and it really is so good for your mental health. Not just we know that getting out in nature, the green prescription is good. There was a study in Glasgow that showed that men that took their dog for a walk in a wood when they were stressed had less heart attacks than men that don't. It is that simple. But it's also when you receive something from the wild, it's a gift and it makes it very personal. It makes you feel very grateful. And all the people that I know who forage, then they're not people who take and ravage the environment. They're people who become the most conscious stewards of nature. You develop this much more loving and interpersonal relationship because you're constantly being given food.
Fantastic. And next question here from Naomi. Is it evidence that a biodiverse gut biome supports our short-term memory? The reason I ask is because I was on a 2-week course of antibiotics and I noticed a negative impact on short-term memory.
Well, I haven't looked at studies with memory, but at the same time, we do know that the gut can communicate directly with the brain via the vagus nerve. So it wouldn't surprise me at all. We did find with the Wildbiome diet that a lot of people felt mentally clearer. And that might just be because it's less inflammatory. Inflammation, we measured CRP, and inflammation was coming down. And of course, inflammation is something that can make us all sort of quite foggy too. But yeah, no, that's an interesting one. Thanks for that question. I'll look into it.
Brilliant. And let's have a look. Another question here. Can you suggest one wild item per month? So maybe 12 things that you throughout each month. It may be one for following up on, but maybe we could do one per season. Monica, how about that?
Okay. Well, right now the mushrooms are coming out. So we finished eating brambles and damsons. I'm looking at the sloes. They're going to be ripening for the winter season. I'm waiting for the hen of the woods to come out. In the middle of winter, I'll be picking oyster mushrooms and pink purslane. And in the spring, I'll be going for seaweeds and then the fresh young wild garlic and things. In the summer, maybe late spring, early summer, some Japanese knotweed shoots and some common hogweed. There's lots of things you can eat.
Awesome. Sally Owens, I'd love to see you work with Robin Wall Kimmerer. She was on the interwebs today saying how good it would be to have places specifically created for people to reconnect with nature by foraging. She was saying the exact same things as you, the truth. And I think there are some amazing foragers who do run, as you have done in the past and do as well, Monica, who do tours, do foraging classes, and there is a real community. If you're able to find one in your local area, I would definitely suggest looking into it, because as I say, there is a lovely community and you can meet some wonderful people doing it within groups. And again, you're out in nature, as Monica rightly said, it's that green prescription, but also being around people and having a community is the other second thing, which is really important to having a happy and healthy life, is having those interpersonal connections as well.
And having a happy and healthy local environment as well. You know, when people are working together rather than viewing each other as competition, you know. You know, a good place to start would be the Association of Foragers, because there's nearly 200 people all around the whole of the British Isles and Ireland, and also now in the Netherlands and Poland and other countries too. And then, you know, if you go on a course, you learn things at first hand, and you get to meet other people from your area. And, you know, I think there's also, I don't really do social media, but I think there's, well, as in, I don't really look at it. I have to post things on it, but I don't really look at what, you know, groups and things like that, because there just isn't the time. But I think there are online Facebook groups in different areas and things like that. But if you go out in the woods long enough, you'll soon start to see who the regulars are and stop and say hello.
Great. So we'll move on to some of our pre-submitted questions. Question one here is, which wild foods are the easiest for a complete beginner to recognize and try first? So rather than maybe talking about specific foods, maybe we could talk more broadly about groups of or species of food. So mushrooms, would you say that's a good starting point? Is that one of the end points for a forager, for example?
I think start with what you know and really think about how much you already know. And then build on that by finding other things that are similar but a little different. You know, if I said to you, here's two round things this size, they're both green, the leaves are wrapped one inside the other, they're a bit curly around the edges, they've got big thick vein, and one's a slightly different green to the other and slightly more floppy than the other, you'd think, what on earth is she talking about? Well, I'm describing a cabbage and a lettuce. And everybody, you know, everybody can probably instantly tell the difference between a cabbage and a lettuce. You can, can't you, Arjun?
Yeah, I'd like to think so, yes.
Yeah, so you have the mental power to go foraging, you know? So, you know, but by looking at, you know, by really studying things you already know, you'll start to get in that eye for the detail and look at. And even with mushrooms, you know, start with chanterelles. You can't really mistake a chanterelle for anything that's going to kill you. You might mistake it for a false chanterelle and then wonder why you didn't have such a great meal. But, you know, it's, you know, that there's about 12 that you can't really mistake for anything else that you could safely eat with mushrooms, and then just leave the rest. You know, don't be over ambitious and just learn to look carefully at things.
And Monica, do you trust some of these, you mentioned about AI and ChatGPT, but the photography apps that you can use to take pictures and analyze plants and foods, would you ever recommend using that at all? Or if you're unsure, just don't bother?
They're getting much more accurate, and you can use them as a guide. But the one thing that you have to remember is that when you look at something through an app, you're not going to remember it afterwards. You know, how many phone numbers do you remember in your head?
Just my mum's, I think, probably.
Mums. Yeah, you know, I mean, we used to, before mobile phones things, we used to remember so much more. And the thing about taking something home and looking at it and really studying it, you know, you remember it. And when something just flashes up on an app, you don't remember it in the same way. You know, which is fine if you've always got your phone with you, acting as a barrier between you and nature. But, you know, if your battery goes, or God forbid the national grid went out or something, then you know, you'd be really stuck.
Brilliant. And I suppose it does defeat a bit of the purpose of being out in nature and actually doing it, you know, for the benefit of your body and mind, if you're, you know, having to use technology to assist you with that.
You know, we've forgotten what it's like to be unattached and to be quiet and to be without. and just to be outside in nature with our own thoughts and engage. And I mean, the foraging is very zen because, you know, monkey mind gets busy looking for what you're going to eat next, and it just frees up the rest of your mind to expand. It really does. So you know, and it's liberating. You know, I mean, people come back from foraging walks and they go like, "Oh my God, I can't believe we were only out for an hour." It's I haven't felt this sense of spaciousness since I was a child.
That's lovely. And so that's a really positive symptom. What are maybe some of the negative symptoms of transitioning to a wild diet?
Well, it's tough. You know, you have to go out. I mean, if you're eating only wild food, you know, you have to go out in all sorts of weathers. You have to plan ahead. If you get, you know, if you've been rushing around too much and you stop at a petrol station, you know, you can't snack on crisps and, you know, and sandwiches. You know, you have to be prepared. You have to put, you know, a lot more thought into it. And you know, there are times of the year where, you know, there's an abundant crop and you have to process it. And, you know, people say, oh, I just wouldn't find the time. But then, you know, I mean, a lot of it takes less time than it takes to watch a whole box set. And I found that, you know, when there's a glut of something that needs, you know, destoning or destemming or chopping or, you know, leaves pulled off or whatever for processing, you know, I'll surreptitiously invite one or two people round for a glass of my best, you know, our best elderflower wine. And, you know, they're sitting around the table and people can't help but start helping you as well. You know, we used to do things in community. We used to do things with our hands. We used to talk to each other. You know, I'm all for bringing those things back.
Yeah, and one of the things we've lost with food as well is that processing element, because everything arrives to us so ready to just use and add to our food because we want everything done very quickly. And that kind of adds to the element of constantly feeling hungry because you want everything quite quickly, don't you? Whereas if everything's a bit slower and you're anticipating your next meal might be, you know, a few hours away, you're mentally a bit more prepared for that, and your gut maybe has more time to prepare for the meal.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be a long time away. I mean, you know, I'm still working when I do this. And there'll be a day when, you know, when I've got a clinic day or something where, you know, I've hardly got any time for lunch. But then that's when I'm grateful for modern technology like the freezer, because on one of my, you know, 2 big trips to the coast every year, you know, I'll pick sea spaghetti, which is a type of seaweed, and I'll freeze it in 100-gram portions. And then on a day when I'm really busy, I mean, it just goes straight from frozen into boiling water. It's ready in 5 minutes. And during that 5 minutes, I've warmed up some rosehip puree, which is like a sort of passata. And that's, you know, Forager's instant noodles. So, but, you know, I had to think about that back in the spring when I went out that day. So, you know, it doesn't have to take hours a day. I mean, you know, here I've got it down to about an hour and a half a day. As long as that's, you know, got, you know, one day of the weekend spent going outside for a bigger trip.
Awesome. So another question from, or a comment from Debbie. I've made dandelion honey and elderflower cordial and jelly, wild garlic pesto. Love new ideas for other foods from the wild. Used to doing in more when I was younger, back in the 70s. Feel we do less now. Absolutely. I must be honest and say I wasn't around in the 70s, but even in my childhood, we used to be out and about all the time, whether that's playing sports or just messing around in the fields and doing all sorts. So we've definitely lost that. So Debbie, if you can get back into it and make more of those things which sound lovely. Dandelion honey I have had before, but the other items not so much. Question 5 here. How do wild foods compare nutritionally to supermarket organic produce? So is there a like for like in terms of maybe you're trying to get a certain amount of calories, or if you're worried about getting enough nutrients of a certain type, how do they compare?
Lower in calories, higher in nutrients. So, I mean, you know, dandelion leaves has, you know, more vitamin A than spinach. Things like wild strawberry leaves have wild strawberry leaves I think is 3 times, and wild violet leaves 5 times more vitamin C than an orange. Now, okay, you might prefer to eat an orange, But, when you are, putting those into salads and putting them into your teas, your herbal teas and things, you're getting a lot more micronutrients. And it's not just about the sort of quantities of those from vitamin A to vitamin K, but there's all of these, when you analyze something like turmeric, which is very popular in the supplements, so people have done a lot of work on it. You've got about 300 different unique compounds. And if you think that every plant, even if you said every plant only has 10 unique compounds, and you eat 100 of them, that's 1,000 different unique compounds that you've added to your diet, as well as your macro and micronutrients. And then calorie wise, it's what you're finding is that it's actually you have to work quite hard and eat a lot to actually get the same calories, which is possibly why the weight loss is there. But you don't feel hungry on it. And that's probably because there's much more fiber, and you chew more, and there's more fiber, and you do feel satiated. You do feel full, and very comfortably full, quite quickly. So you don't often feel hungry. I very rarely feel hungry when I'm eating wild food. Whereas when you're eating carbs, and particularly the white carbs that convert sugars very, very easily, your blood sugar goes up and down. You get these hunger spikes. You get hangry. You don't get that. I don't get that on the wild food diet. And certainly in the film, you'll see people talking about this type of how they feel about it.
And within the film, this question might relate to the film a little bit. What role does seasonality play? Do different seasons change the impact on our health? So I suppose specifically in terms of food, rather than say the amount of sunlight we get, obviously we know does play an impact on a lot of people. But seasonality, how does that feature within the film, if at all? And then also, how does that impact foraging?
Well, within the film, you've got to remember that the period that the Wildbiome experiment took place was from April to June, from mid-April to mid-June. So you haven't got the depths of winter or the mists of autumn there. But at the same time, you're seeing people moving from a very late winter, early spring diet into the more abundant season of summer. When you talk about seasonality, what I found was what really impactful with me is that when people think a lot about seasonality, they tend to think a lot about, as you mentioned earlier, are you eating strawberries in the middle of winter? Is the asparagus coming from Peru or Norfolk? The raspberries coming from Glen Lyon or Spain? But what you notice with the wild diet is that entire food groups move in and out of season. So for instance, the classic one would be wheat. What is wheat? Wheat is a grass. Grasses ripen at the end of the summer, and then the grain has been collected for 720,000 years before we were even Homo sapiens. People would collect grass grains and grind them up. And then they tend to be saved until we run out of food, and then eaten over the winter. And then, people didn't have a lot of storage ability and everything. So most of it would have got finished up by January or February. And then where would you get it from? Because it's a grass, so it has to grow and ripen, and, it produces the grain for the end of autumn. So you would have naturally had a gluten-free period of, 6 or 7 months at least. And then, if people just, if they eat sort of a wheat-based cereal for breakfast every day, and a sandwich for lunch every day, and pasta for supper every evening, and then come into the clinic and say, I've been eating like this for 40 years, and I think I'm gluten intolerant. It's like, well, the fact that you've kind of overdosed on it might have something to do with it as well. I think our gut, or what I'm seeing with our guts is that they're very plastic. They're actually very mobile, and they move throughout the year, and the bacteria come and go and sort of change. But maybe they're designed to be flexible and moving and not static all the time. So, if you have one food that you predominate on all the time, then you're not going to allow for that flexibility within your gut.
Great. And leading on from that, in a way, is could wild foods or a more diverse diet help children build stronger immunity? Which I think would a diverse diet generally is absolutely key for all age groups, particularly for children.
Key. And I would say, introduce children to a wide range of things at the very earliest age. You'll see in the film that Amy's little baby, you'll see her eating, common hogweed and Japanese knotweed and sweet Sicily and all of these things happily. Her favorite was actually common hogweed. And it's just a lot of children now, they some of them were given very nice organic, foods out pouches, but they still tend to be very sweet and very pulpy. There's not a lot of chewing going on, so they develop crowded jaws and then dental problems for later. And people develop this quite sweet palate, where in actual fact we're supposed to have this sort of broader range of foods in our diet. So start them young.
And the other benefit of that is they will have that connection with nature as well, and they'll learn foraging through you, and that'll be another connection that you'll have with your child potentially as well.
Yeah.
Once they move into childhood, into teenage and adult life as well. I've just realised the time; it's past 8 o'clock. Are we okay to go for another?
I'm absolutely fine if you are, but I'm just going to switch the light on because it's got dark while we've been chatting.
No worries. We have covered this question a little bit, but I don't know if you want to add anything to it. Does eating wild food change how people feel emotionally or mentally, not just physically? So we spoke about the gut microbiome and how that is linked to so many different bodily functions and organs. So that's one of the key benefits of going wild and foraged and having a more diverse diet. But what about the mental health aspect of it outside of just being outdoors?
Yeah, no, you do. I feel different, and I know a lot of the others do as well. And it's very hard to describe. I mean, some of it is mental. So I feel sharper, much more sort of quick-witted and sharper, and I feel that I have a better memory and, can think and focus better when I'm eating wild food. And then I think emotionally there's a certain confidence that comes from being able to feed yourself from the wild. That is a really beautiful thing. It's a real sense of empowerment that you can go out, you can walk out with nothing but a basket and a knife and be fed, find food and be fed. And then I think also, and this is very hard to explain, there's a certain ethereal lightness of spirit that those are probably the best words that I have to describe it. But and it's not to do with weight or the physical body, but and a lot of the other foragers who've done this Wildbiome Project have said this to me as well. We know, and this time when we did it, I was talking to someone who'd also done it in 2023, Gemma, who's in the film, and I said to her, when I sat down and on the sort of the first day, and there was part of me that went like, oh God, this again, it's going to be hard work, and then but my body literally from the first meal sort of leapt for joy. There was a sort of joyousness in the body that was way ahead of my mind, that was grumbling away. And Gemma said to me, I had exactly the same feeling. There's a sort of, there's a kind of like very physical recognition. This is what I want. This is good for me.
Oh, lovely. That sounds amazing, honestly. And I think, part of that is obviously the nutrition element of it, but also, as you rightly pointed out, having that freedom of knowing that you're capable of doing something, and it's giving you that sort of confidence almost, that you're able to be self-sustaining.
Well, and at the end, and I say this in the film, which, you know, I'm the narrator in the film, and I say this, you know, if you are what you eat, what happens when what you eat is wild? You know, it does change you.
Yeah, it's your very makeup is the food that you eat. Absolutely. And
Yeah.
so yeah, fantastic. Uh, how can someone like me who has an aversion to vegetables eat more healthily? And I suppose actually eating forages may be a good alternative to just purely eating vegetables, because you're eating such a variety of plants, leaves, mushrooms are you might not like, but yeah, even seaweeds, all sorts of different foods, nuts as well. I suppose that in itself would maybe help someone who has an aversion to vegetables, is the variety of what you may be able to find.
Yes, it is difficult. It's like when people say to me, I don't like mushrooms, I say, which one? You know,
Yeah, because you
because
get such meaty ones, you get some which are very soft and delicate.
you
Yeah,
get you get some that taste
much
like
bitter.
carrots and, you know, or smell of flour, and yeah, and some that taste of aniseed. I think with vegetables, I think it's trying to think what it is about them that you don't like. So often it's that they were badly prepared when you were a kid. You know,
Yeah,
there was a
boiled to
stage where
smithereens.
everybody boiled everything
Yeah.
to death. And I don't know, I might actually just, like, you know, empty the piggy bank and go out to a really good vegetarian restaurant or a vegan restaurant or a vegetarian restaurant, and actually go and really taste some vegetables that have been really cooked well and with love. You know, and, you know, because it may be the way that it's cooked, but it may not, you know, it may well not be all vegetables. So just sort of, yeah, go on a journey of exploration.
Excellent. Here we have quite a specific question. I live in Lochaber and am keen to learn from and with others on this path of eating wilder. I find it hard to do alone. Do you know of like-minded people, foragers or ethnobotanists who I might meet in my area? I suppose that's a tricky one for you to know specifically, but you've mentioned
Low carb is near Dunfermline, isn't it? Well, yes. I mean, Association of Foragers and Foraging Teachers, you know, they will have groups of people in your area that are interested. There are also the mycological forays and mycological fungi groups all around Scotland. There's different areas, and, you know, during the mushroom season, there are people who they're free of charge, and there are people who just go out and, you know, look at mushrooms together, mushroom geeks, you know. Everybody in the foraging world's a little bit nerdy. I think well over, when I did the questionnaire this time, over 55% of people in foraging, identified with some form of um, um, spec, not neuronormative spectrum, shall we say.
No, there's a type, shall we say? Yeah.
Well, there's, you know, I mean, they do think that, you know, that ADHD traits are very similar to the skills you need when you're a hunter-gatherer. But, you know, that again, that's another topic. As is things like color blindness, you know, which is, you know, if you're looking at things without the distraction of color, you're really good at seeing things that are camouflaged. And you know, I think 1 in 12 men is, you know, color blind. And then only 1 in 200 women, because if women were mainly the foragers, you needed to see if the berry was red and ripe. You needed to see color to know that you weren't going
Yeah,
to poison everybody.
that's an amazing fact that I'd never had even crossed my mind. That's brilliant. And so we talked a lot about vegan, vegetarian, plant-based foraging. How about game, rabbit? There's a question here about that, and then Sheila also mentioned a question about does roadkill count, such as pheasant, etc. Is that included?
Yes, roadkill does, you know, roadkill does count. A lot of people ate roadkill, but do please, you know, make sure that you know how to identify, you know, an animal that's healthy, and that you only take it early in the morning, um, you know, when it's not heated up in the heat of the day. Yes, I do. I don't buy supermarket meat, and I have very strong opinions about the ethics of a lot of the animal farming and animal husbandry now. But I do eat meat, and I do eat wild meat, and but it's, it's all the meat that I get is from culling programs from people that I know, and I know that they know the herds. I mean, deer have to be kept to a certain amount per acre. Otherwise, not only does the environment suffer, but the deer themselves suffer. If they're overpopulated, they starve and they get really sick. So, here in Scotland, there's a lot of, deer management and culling, and but pheasants and things are very different because they're bred just to be killed. It's quite different. But then a lot of farmers kill pigeons and things too, and if they're not eaten, I suppose, what does happen to them.
Brilliant. So we have got quite a few more questions, but I think we'll start to wrap up, and unfortunately we won't get to all of them just because it's been a lovely discussion and there's been so many interesting questions coming through on the live chat as well. What are the preliminary results from this latest round, or have they been released yet? I know you mentioned they were done yesterday.
Well, the ones that came out yesterday was all the diet diaries, so the food, and that's not been analysed. What we are seeing is confirmation of our results in 2023. We're seeing significant improvements in blood pressure. We're seeing movements in people with diabetes. But then, people with good blood sugar, it's not affected. Some people go up and down a bit. Cholesterol is a little bit mixed because, of course, a lot of people had quite significant weight loss. And then it's, the liver has to deal with, the cholesterol from the fat loss as well. Significant weight loss for those who want to lose it, which they all found very easy to do, but still feeling healthy, still having a lot of energy. And what else were we measuring? Yeah, CRP, inflammation coming down. Improvements in vitamin D, of course, you're getting out and about, and D and vitamin B and magnesium and iron and things pretty constant. Yeah, and in most cases the thyroid staying pretty stable. Liver, some liver enzymes go up, but again, that was to do with the people who lost a lot of weight quickly. But yeah, we're really seeing that just in most health parameters, people are really getting healthy. And then these extra surprising things like suddenly hay fever going and sleep improving, and some people no longer having hormonal migraines.
It's been so fascinating talking to you about this, Mo. Honestly, blown my mind how you initially came up with the idea and how you followed through with it, and how it's now grown into such a wonderful project that potentially has lots of positive ramifications for lots of different future studies, people's own health. And I think one of the things we're always preaching at Napiers is trying to take ownership of your health, and this is a really good way of doing that. It's separating yourself from what's on the shelves in the shops, which we're at the mercy of sometimes when there is shortages of certain things. And so putting this film out, I think, is really hopefully going to broaden people's horizons and get them interested in foraging. I'm really looking forward to.
Are you going to
watching.
send people the link? Someone's asking, how can we watch the film?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're going to do is we can pop the link to everyone who's watching here. You will receive a kind of follow-up email with the link where to purchase or where to rent the film. So there's two options for you. If you would like to keep the film, then that's definitely absolutely an option, and it has just been posted in there as well. So yeah, please do check out the film. Make sure you watch it, because it's very interesting to see how the stories develop, how the symptoms or health benefits actually come to light. And yeah, you just get to see day to day how people's lives have changed. It's narrated by Mo, who's obviously extremely knowledgeable. I don't know if you have any other points that you'd like to mention, Mo?
I'd just like to thank everybody for showing so much interest and coming along. I mean, obviously for me, it's really close to my heart. I was chucked out of a lot of classes when I was a kid at school for being, for asking too many questions and being stubborn. But for me, this project has harnessed all of those asking lots of questions and being stubborn, because it's been really tough along the way to do it. But I think I'm somebody that, if things are tough, it just makes me want to crack them more. And I just think that, the takeaway from this is, like, please don't think of foraging and wild food as something niche. Over 50% of the global population still depends significantly on wild food for a source of the, nutrition. Farming gives you calories. 50% of the world's daily intake comes from just 3 species: wheat, corn, and rice. But that doesn't nourish you. And it's the wild foods that nourish us. And in times of war, I mean, like, there's some statistics in Syria about how much foraging increases. These are valuable skills that we should keep alive and teach our children, because we live in uncertain times and we don't know necessarily, what will happen. And, we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And, knowing, by doing the Wildbiome Project, by teaching people about the nutrition values and things which, we're just starting a whole series of papers that we're going to publish on this. I'm just hoping to keep it alive so we never lose this in the world.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Monica. So yes, if you're looking to be inspired, please do go and watch Our Wild Biome. It's out now. There's more results to follow. There's more involvement opportunities as well, as Monica has popped into the chat. We can add that to the follow-up as well, just so you guys have got it there in case you missed it. So yeah, keep up to date with the Wild Biome, the project's update. And I advise you to maybe just try one small change, whether it's once a week, once a month, just add in a wild foraged item of your choice. I recommend wild garlic pesto because it was delicious. But there's obviously thousands and thousands of other recipes, and you can find some of those on Mo's website as well. She's got plenty of books and references to point you in the right direction. So thanks again for everyone for joining, and a special thank you to Monica for giving us the time and knowledge and putting a lot of effort into bringing this to fruition.
And thank you so much, Arjun.
No worries. We're always here to support great things in the world of plants and the world of health. So thank you very much.